The night Elon Musk's first baby stopped breathing, the man who wanted to reach Mars discovered there was a distance no rocket could cross. Not between planets, between a father and a crib that had gone silent. In 2002, Elon was not yet the figure the world would argue about every day. He was not yet the face of electric cars, rockets landing on fire, satellites crossing the dark sky, or bold promises about the future of civilization. He was a young husband in Los Angeles, newly rich from the PayPal years, carrying the strange pressure of a man who had finally won something enormous and did not yet know what it would cost him. He and Justine had a son, Nevada Alexander Musk, a small boy with a name that sounded wide and open, like a desert horizon. A baby who had entered a house full of ambition and noise and turned it, for a moment, into something softer. There are men who become fathers and immediately understand that the world has changed. There are other men who pretend nothing has changed because the feeling is too large to face. Elon, by every account, was not a man who liked helplessness. He liked problems. He liked code, machines, equations, impossible odds. He liked the kind of crisis where a person could stay awake long enough, think hard enough, push people hard enough, and force reality to move. But a sleeping baby is not an engineering problem. And that is where this story begins. Because one day, Nevada went down for a nap. A normal nap. A small, ordinary moment in a life that should have had thousands more ordinary moments. Then the breathing stopped. Imagine the house after that. Not the mythology, not the headlines, not the billionaire profile written years later. Just a father and a mother suddenly hearing the wrong kind of silence. Someone calling for help. Someone saying, "He's not breathing." Someone saying it again because the mind refuses to understand it the first time. In a life like Elon's, speed had always meant salvation. Move faster, decide faster, build faster, launch faster, beat the clock. But that day, the clock did not care how fast he wanted to move. The paramedics came. The hospital came. The machines came. And still the future narrowed to one small body. For 3 days, Nevada remained on life support. 3 days is a strange measure of time when a child is in a hospital. It is too short to accept what is happening, and too long to survive unchanged. The hallway becomes a world. The lights become cruel. The beeping machines begin to sound like a language no one wants to learn. In those rooms, people do not speak the way they speak in ordinary life. They whisper, they bargain, they stare at doors. A doctor might say, gently, "There has been too much oxygen loss." A mother might ask, "Are you saying there is no hope?" And a father, especially a father like Elon, might look at the machines and think, there must be another option. Because men like that are built around options. But grief is not a market. It does not negotiate. It does not care about intelligence. It does not care that a man has just become wealthy or that he has ideas about changing the future. That hospital did not need Elon Musk, the visionary. It needed Elon Musk, the father. And that may have been the one role where nothing he could build was enough. People say, his first child died. They say it in one sentence, then move on to Tesla, SpaceX, Mars, money, and controversy. They treat it like a footnote, because a footnote is easier than a nursery that never heard another morning. But for a parent, there is no footnote. There is only before and after. And somewhere in that after, something in Elon hardened. Not all at once. More likely it happened quietly, in the private place where a man decides what he will never allow himself to feel again. Some people collapse after grief. Some people cry until the world slowly lets them stand. And some people do something much more difficult to understand. They run. They work. They make the days so loud that the silence cannot catch them. That may be the key to this story. Not that Elon stopped hurting, but that he may have learned to survive by never standing still long enough for the hurt to speak. Because some men do not become driven because they are fearless. Some men become driven because if they stop moving, the grief will finally find them. After Nevada's death, the outside world kept moving with a cruelty that only grief can reveal. The papers still talked about PayPal. Investors still talked about opportunity. California still glittered in the sun. People still shook Elon's hand and looked at him as a young man who had made it. From the outside, it looked like a rival. But inside the house, arrival had turned into absence. Justine later wrote about the loss with a directness that makes the room feel quiet even years later. Nevada had stopped breathing. He was 10 weeks old. He had suffered too much oxygen deprivation. He remained on life support before the decision no parent should ever have to make. And after that, she said, Elon did not want to talk about Nevada's death. That detail matters. Not because it makes him cruel in some simple way. Real grief is rarely simple. It matters because it shows two people burning differently in the same fire. One wanted to grieve outward. One seemed determined to seal the door. You can imagine the conversation in a house that no longer felt like home. Justine saying, "We have to talk about him." Elon staring at the floor, saying, "Talking won't bring him back." But silence won't either. Then nothing. Not because there was no love, maybe because there was too much pain and no language large enough to carry it. There are men who are taught from boyhood that sorrow is something to defeat. Do not cry. Do not break. Do not ask for help. Turn pain into work. Turn fear into control. Turn loss into motion. For a man already built around ambition, grief can become fuel before he understands what he is burning. And the years that followed began to look like motion. Tesla, SpaceX, long nights, impossible deadlines, failures that would have destroyed slower men. Factories, rockets, arguments, near bankruptcies, public doubt, private pressure, and the repeated sense that everything was always on the edge of collapse. People later asked where that intensity came from. They pointed to childhood. They pointed to Silicon Valley. They pointed to ego, genius, insecurity, mission, competition, money. Maybe all of that is true. But there may be another room in the story. A hospital room. A room where a young father learned that the world can take what you love in a moment, and no amount of brilliance can stop it. That kind of knowledge can ruin a person, or it can make a person terrifyingly committed to control. For Elon, control often looked like work. Work until the body gives out. Work until the impossible becomes merely late. Work until no quiet evening remains. Work until memory has nowhere to sit. Years later, when people watched him sleep under desks, risk huge amounts of money, and speak about humanity needing to become a multi-planetary species, they saw ambition. They saw obsession. They saw a man trying to bend the future. But maybe part of him was also running from one fact no future could fix. He had lost a child. And there is something about losing a child that changes the meaning of time. Before such a loss, time feels like a road. Birthdays, school mornings, first words, graduations. After such a loss, time becomes evidence. Every year tells you how old the child would have been. Every success arrives beside an invisible absence. A rocket reaches orbit, and somewhere a father may think of a boy who never saw the sky through a toddler's eyes. This is not the version of Elon Musk that fits easily into business documentaries. It is not the hero version or the villain version. It is a quieter and more uncomfortable possibility. That behind the relentless motion was not only ego, there was also grief. The kind of grief that waits in the body, changes the shape of a man's voice, makes tenderness feel dangerous, and makes rest feel like a trap. And for a father who could not save his first son, saving the future may have become more than a mission. It may have become a way to keep breathing. That does not excuse every hard edge. Pain can deepen a person, but it can also make him difficult. But understanding a man is not the same as worshiping him. Sometimes understanding simply means looking at the wound beneath the armor. And in Elon's story, that wound has a name: Nevada. When the world saw Elon racing toward Mars, it may have thought he was only chasing the future. But some men chase the future because the past is too painful to enter. As Elon moved deeper into the years that would define him, the public story grew louder. Tesla nearly failed more than once. SpaceX watched rockets explode before they finally flew. Money vanished. Critics laughed. Friends worried. Employees burned out. And Elon kept pushing. To the public, it looked like hunger. And it was hunger. But grief can disguise itself as hunger so completely that even the person carrying it may not know where one ends and the other begins. There is a line that seems to follow this story like a shadow. Some people stop after pain. Others start running because standing still would destroy them. That is not a slogan. It is a survival pattern. After Nevada, Elon did not become softer in any obvious public way. He did not become the kind of man who spent interviews talking gently about loss. He became more driven, more forceful, more willing to risk everything. He poured himself into machines that could outlast flesh: batteries, rockets, software, factories, systems. Things that could be improved, tested, repaired, relaunched. A rocket can fail and fly again. A child cannot. That difference may be the deepest ache in the whole story. When SpaceX failed, Elon could study the explosion and try again. When Tesla nearly collapsed, he could raise money, cut costs, and fight another day. When engineers told him something could not be done, he could challenge the premise. But no father can iterate his way out of a crib that went silent. And maybe that is why his later life often seemed to carry an almost desperate hatred of limits. Limits had once taken something from him. The limit of medicine. The limit of time. The limit of the human body. The limit of a parent's power. So he went to war with limits wherever he could find them. Electric cars were not supposed to replace gasoline. Private rockets were not supposed to reach orbit. Reusable boosters were not supposed to land upright. A company on the edge was not supposed to survive. A man who had lost so much was not supposed to keep going at that speed. But he did. And even when a person becomes famous, grief does not become glamorous. It remains ordinary, brutal, domestic. It lives in small rooms, in old memories, in the missing face at the family table. It can sit behind a man's eyes while he speaks to thousands. It can stand beside him during the biggest victories of his life and remind him that success is not resurrection. This is why the story of Nevada Alexander Musk matters. Not because it explains everything about Elon. No single tragedy explains an entire person. But it reveals a private door inside a public life. It suggests that behind impossible projects may have been a father who learned early that the most important things can disappear without warning. That lesson can make a person tender. It can also make a person hard. Sometimes it does both. For anyone who has learned that life can change between one breath and the next, this story is not really about rockets. It is about the strange ways people survive what they cannot heal. Some speak. Some pray. Some hold photographs. Some return to work because work is the only place where they know what to do with their hands. And some build entire futures because the past has become unbearable. That does not make the pain beautiful. It only makes the survival visible. Nevada Alexander Musk lived only 10 weeks, but his absence belongs to the hidden history of a driven man of the modern age. Before Mars, before reusable rockets, before electric cars became a global symbol, there was a young father in a hospital corridor facing a truth no achievement could erase. He could build companies. He could build rockets. He could build a vision of tomorrow so large that the world had to look up. But he could not rebuild that one small life. And maybe that is why, after that night, he never really stopped moving. The world saw a man trying to save the future. But somewhere inside that future was a father still trying to outrun the silence of a room where his child was gone. If stories like this remind you that even the most powerful lives are shaped by private heartbreak, subscribe for more untold stories behind the people the world thought it already understood.